Hey there, guys. All right, today we are back with some more of the Great War, and we are on to week 208, Second Battle of the Marne, turning point on the Western Front. So the inevitable has come for the Germans after some weeks there of 1918, where it kind of felt like I was left wondering, what the hell do the Germans do, or the Allies do, to turn things around? Because really, for a good while, it really seemed like the Germans should have won. And honestly, probably on paper, well, actually, really, if we want to analyze things on paper, the British and French really should not have been struggling against the Germans as much because they are two global empires with land on every single continent. And then the Germans really just have Germany and some islands in the Pacific and two colonial territories in Africa. It really should not have been this hard, but the German military on Europe, fucking strong as fuck. So, but I mean, if we really look at on paper here in 1918, uh, at least with how the Western Front was kind of like setting up to be, it kind of seemed like the Germans should have had a victory, but they didn't. So, with all that said, let's go ahead and dive right in.
This week, after nearly 4 months of withstanding the might of the Kaiserschlacht, the German spring offensives, week after week after week, the Allied counterattack finally comes.
Dun, dun, dun.
I'm Indy Nidell. Welcome to the Great War. Last week there was a lot of action far to the east in Siberia, but it was primarily a week of planning as the Germans finalized plans for their next Western Front offensive, even in the face of a deadly flu epidemic. That offensive, which would be known as the Second Battle of the Marne, kicked into gear this week. The Germans were going to attack with Crown Prince Wilhelm's 49 divisions. One of the goals was to open a second railway line to the Marne, and also to draw off Allied reserves from Flanders in the north for an attack up there that would happen in just a few days. The Allies knew exactly when this week's attack was coming, though, so French and American artillery bombarded the German front lines and jumping off points half an hour before the German bombardment began. The German barrage was still pretty strong, though. For example, raining 17,500 rounds of gas on the sector of front held by the American Rainbow Division. Then the Germans went over the top, east of Rheims, and found that the French trenches weren't exactly trenches. Well, okay, they were trenches, but they were only lightly manned, and the German bombardment had been wasted on them. The Germans overran these and killed what few defenders there were, but the real trenches further back were basically untouched, and of course, full of French soldiers. French General Philippe Pétain, after pushing so hard for so long for the French to use a defense-in-depth system to neutralize the German shock troop advantage, had finally gotten his wish, and General Henri Gouraud had implemented it. And as the Germans advanced on the manned trenches, they came under heavy fire from French and American artillery.
It's such a shame that Philippe Pétain becomes a fucking fascist authoritarian piece of shit. He's one of the few competent French generals. Like, it's so disappointing. Holy shit, young MacArthur. God damn. USA.
Chief of Staff of the Rainbow Division, Douglas MacArthur, said,
Never heard of him.
"When they met the dikes of our real line, they were exhausted, uncoordinated, and scattered, incapable of going on without being reorganized and reinforced." That was east of Rheims. West of Rheims, where the French under Jean Degout and the French and Italians under Henri Berthelot were using the old system with the men too far forward, the Germans were quickly successful, though their failure in the east meant that those successful German troops were dangerously exposed. So they called off the attack in the west. But it had to keep going somewhere, because it was essential to draw Allied reserves away from Flanders before the German attack up there. On the 16th, the German bombardment was renewed, now against the French and Americans in Champagne, including 500,000 gas shells. Over the next 2 days, it seemed like the Germans would break through. And that could have been the decisive breakthrough, but in one sector, French gunners knocked out all 20 German tanks. In another, fewer than 4,000 Americans, outnumbered 3-1, held their ground in vicious hand-to-hand fighting, while overhead, 225 French bombers with 40 tons of bombs dropped them on the bridges the Germans had set up across the River Marne. Near Chateau Thierry, the American 3rd Division managed to blow up every single pontoon bridge the Germans set up in the whole sector, earning itself the sobriquet, the Rock of the Marne. But the Germans kept on coming, pouring into the river in the face of machine guns and infantry, to the point that by noon that day, as American General Joseph T. Dickman would write, there were no Germans in the foreground of the 3rd Division except the dead. The Americans also took heavy casualties holding back the tide. On the 17th, Italian troops that had been brought in stopped the Germans at Nanteuil-Poissy. On the morning of the 18th, German Quartermaster General Erich Ludendorff had a conference with his command, where the first thing he did was dismiss any possibility of an Allied counterattack in the south. Then
He was seemingly so competent. He was seemingly so competent. Ludendorff, don't just dismiss possibility.
Then they talked about tactical options if the British in Flanders used the same new defense system the French just had. And then around noon came the word that Allied Supreme Commander Ferdinand Foch had in fact launched an Allied counterattack.
Yeah.
It kicked off with a 2,000-gun artillery barrage along just over a 40-kilometer front. French General Charles Mangin led 23 divisions, 4 of them American, following nearly 500 tanks in an attack to try and recapture Soissons and seal off the German salient. David Stevenson writes in With Our Backs to the Wall, not for the last time, the Germans were wholly surprised. Part of the reason was overconfidence. Crown Prince Wilhelm had thought the Allies too weak both to defend Rheims and to counterattack. But the Allies had agreed that surprise was absolutely crucial for success, so concentrating the forces leading up to the attack was done in just 4 days. Well, nights, since it was all done in darkness, and the tanks were hidden in the forest. This counterattack was huge, on a total front of over 100 kilometers by 4 armies, but the spearhead was the 1st and 2nd American divisions and the 1st Moroccan division, who were largely Senegalese. The bulk of the tanks were light Renaults, armed with machine guns that could go like 13 or 14 kilometers per hour, and they attacked out of the mist.
So fast.
The German lines broke, and they were driven back some 7 kilometers. 20,000 Germans were taken prisoner, as well as 400 big guns. As the week came to an end, though, Mangin was stopped before he could reach Soissons. And there were some seriously heavy Allied casualties. For example, the Italian Corps fighting on the 19th lost a third of its strength. But after just the first 2 days, now the Germans might have no realistic hope left of taking Rheims, and the German threat to Paris would then be no more. But more importantly, if the Marne salient became unholdable, Ludendorff would have no real choice but to postpone the Flanders offensive indefinitely. There is a story from this week, maybe true, maybe not, of a ruse devised by a couple of American engineers. A briefcase with fake plans for the counterattack was handcuffed to a man who had died of pneumonia, right? Then they put him in a vehicle that looked like it had run off the road at a German-controlled bridge. The Germans found the plans and believed them, then adjusted their own plans to stop the fake Allied plan. So when the Allied attack came, it came elsewhere and hit an exposed part of the German lines, leaving them no choice but to retreat. Again, I don't know if this is true or not.
I mean, it sounds like an American thing to do. But yeah, I don't how plausible that is. I don't know, there's just I'm gonna lean towards it's probably a made up story. But like also sometimes there are some things that are just so ridiculous. Like in history, there are so many things that are just absolutely ridiculous that are true. Like you hear them and you're like, there's no way that's true. And it's fucking true. So like, I am not quite sure what to believe. My gut leans towards no. I'm gonna go with that.
Something that is true from that front is that on the 16th, a German flying ace named Hermann Goering shot down
Never
his
heard of him.
22nd plane, and 3 days previously had taken command of the Richthofen Squadron. That squadron was named after Baron von Richthofen, the Red Baron, who'd been killed in April. There was Central Powers action on other fronts this week as well. On July 13th, using mainly German troops, General Liman von Sanders attacked British General Edmund Allenby's bridgehead on the east bank of the Jordan River, northeast of Jericho. But Australian troops pushed back the attackers. This attack worried the British command, though, who thought that if Sanders made such an attack on the Arab revolt forces east of the river and won, the British flanks would be exposed and their plans for an autumn offensive ruined. One Central Powers offensive had hit some snags, though. Nuri Pasha's Army of Islam was advancing at a crawl through the Caucasus towards Baku. The summer heat, the lack of sufficient drinking water, and poor supply lines would have slowed any army, but his was now racked by an epidemic of dysentery. By the time his forces...
So why is he so focused on the Caucasus when he has the fucking British pushing up in Mesopotamia and Palestine? And he has an Arab revolt in Arabia. What is the Pasha doing? The Ottomans are so fucking dumb.
Reached Kurdamir, he estimated he had only 4,000 soldiers that were really fit for active fighting. Add to that the Azeri militia were deserting in droves, so he had only around 8,000 men at the moment available to try and take Baku and its oil fields. But he would try at the end of the month. As for those defending the city, on the 15th, after skirmishing west of it and nearly being encircled, Colonel Bisharikov comes to the conclusion that his Cossacks, even bolstered by the Armenians and the Red Guard, cannot stop the Ottomans with their artillery in the open field. They retreated towards the city's environs to plan the defense there. And here are two notes to end the week. On July 16, 1918, Tsar Nicholas Romanov and his family were executed at Ekaterina.
That was this week. Oh. Oh boy. Like, that was in the back of my mind. I was like, wait a minute. Has the Tsar and his family been fucking shot yet? Here's the answer. Yes.
Ekaterinburg, capital of Red Ural, by order of the Ural Regional Soviet. Deposed by the February Revolution last year, Nicholas had been the force that guided Russia into this war 4 years ago. There was also news this week from another initial guiding force of the war. On July 15th, after the huge failure of the recent Austrian offensive in Italy, Franz Conrad von Hotzendorf is dismissed and placed on the retired list. He is also...
It's a dream come true. Finally. Just way too fucking late. How many years?
Also raised from Freiherr to Graf, so from like Baron to like Count. But for Conrad von Hotzendorf, this war is over. And this week of the war
I hope he doesn't die peacefully. I hope he suffered in the end.
ends with yet another German offensive, but a mighty Allied counterattack that, as the week ends, is a success. A German failure in the Middle East, setbacks in the Caucasus, and the death of a Tsar. Well, he was no longer the Tsar. You know, when you think about it, there's nearly no one left. The leaders, the men who guided the world into this war, or led the armies, or both, 3 years and 50 weeks ago, they're almost all gone. Call the roll. Nicholas, Conrad, Franz Joseph, Moltke, Joffre, French, Putnik. They're all gone. Only Enver Pasha and Kaiser Wilhelm remain at their posts from those 1914 days. And even the Kaiser's power has been reduced by army command. It's now different men fighting with different weapons and different tactics, and it's also a totally different world. If you'd like to learn more,
That's one of the things that makes me just love this fucking series and why I think it's so fucking good. Um, that perspective there, that just simple statement of, hey, think about this. In the last 3, almost 4 years, only 2 people remain in their original position still. Everyone else is like gone, dead or retired, or like replaced. Um, and that's just so weird to think. But that's another one of the things that this show has pointed out that typical, at least American education does not point out because it doesn't really serve too much of a point in terms of what the goal of talking about World War One is in terms of the American education system. Um, but it is such a really neat thing to just now be aware of when you think of World War One and just the pointlessness of it. This helps drive it home how pointless this war really is and how stupid it is. 'Cause now, even after all this death, 4 years into the war, almost, um, the people that started it, most of them aren't there anymore. Yet they are still going to keep fighting. They are still going to keep killing, sending husbands, sons, fathers, brothers, friends to their deaths because no one wants to just stop killing. No one wants to suck up their pride, their egos, and just status quo. Let things drop. Just stop entirely and just be like, this was dumb. Let's just stop killing. No one wants to do that. No one wants to look at war in that way. War, there must always be something tangibly gotten in a war. Because otherwise, politicians, the people in power, will have nothing to really defend themselves with in the eyes of the public. This was the Great War, week 208, the Second Battle of the Marne, turning point on the Western Front. I hope you there wasn't there was a decent bit to talk about this week, 18 minutes. I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.